So good afternoon and welcome everybody. Jennifer Liston-Smith here. I'm Head of Coaching and Consultancy with My Family Care. Delighted that you could join us today for this webinar on readiness for the Olympics and specifically whether your business is flexible enough for the Olympics. Delighted to have with us on the line today both Caroline Stroud and Sam Barnes from Freshfields Employment, Pensions and Benefits Department. Caroline and Sam have been involved in advising the London Olympic Committee of the, sorry, I'm just putting the slide forward. I've been involved in advising the London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games on a wide range of employment law issues. And we're also joined by Rick Cudworth, partner at Deloitte and lead partner for Resilience Services, which consists of over 50 specialists addressing technology, operational and organisational resilience and preparedness. So one of Rick's key responsibilities is as lead partner for Games Readiness. And in this role, Rick and his team are working with LOCOG and the GLA in support of their integrated readiness and testing programs for London 2012. So Rick sits on Deloitte's own internal Games Readiness program steering group as a specialist advisor and is engagement partner for several client advisory projects in this area. So all three of our guests have experience of really engaging with what it means to get ready for the Olympics as a world-class professional services organization in their own right, and also engaging with and advising clients. So really looking forward to hearing and benefiting from your experience. So welcome, panelists. And as many of you who are on the line already know, My Family Care helps employers and employees combine work and family. So flexibility is of particular interest to many of our clients. I know many of you on the line are our clients today and friends and contacts of ours, but for those of you who don't know us, the way that the Olympics promotes greater awareness of flexibility is of particular concern to us. So this is part of our quarterly webinars for HR and diversity leaders on all things that really support the integration of work and family, and we see this as one that presents a step forward really in that area potentially. So just as we go into the session, I would like to let you know that we're recording it. We plan to make that and other resources available to you afterwards. So results of polls that we'll be running during the webinar, you'll see those live, but we'll also send you those results afterwards and further links and resources, because we know that a lot of you will be keen to find out what others are doing. And we've got a host of sort of like-minded organizations on the line. It'll be very interesting to see how things are shaping up for you at this point in the preparing for the Games timeline. So what we promised was to share the really rich best practice experience that our clients Deloitte and Freshfields have, and to make that available to you. But equally, we'd invite you to type in questions and share your experience that way, those many others of you who are on the line. So please do feel free to speak up in that way. So as we crack on, I know we've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to set a fair pace here, really. We've got on the line quite a range of people representing HR and diversity, from directors, diversity specialists, employee relations, policy specialists, internal communications, and as you can see there on the screen, a range of sectors, banking and financial services particularly represented, as are retail and many others. And as I say, you'll have a copy of these slides, so if any of it does seem a little bit speedy, you will definitely have it in front of you to go over following the webinar. So we asked you when you joined how prepared you are, and we've kind of plotted that against how concerned you were, the other question that we asked you. So it's good to see that you know, there's quite a bit of preparation underway. There's a certain level of concern, but those of you who are some concerned or very concerned have done some preparation, which is, you know, kind of encouraging. Nobody considers themselves fully prepared, largely. And I guess that's because we don't necessarily have a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not necessarily possible to know, are we really prepared? But what we do know is that this is something you can really see through two lenses. You know, in some ways, the Olympics present a huge threat to organizations in the sense of great disruption in staff. We were very struck by Steve Wheeler, local business director for BT London Business, talking about 8 weeks of snow. Hardly dare mention that at the moment with the freezing temperatures. But we know how disruptions in the norm can impact business, and potentially this is one that is going to last for a long time and have a massive impact, which we're going to look at in obviously more detail in a moment. We could also imagine that there will be security threats. We have past memories, some of us, of Munich in 1972, and of course the London 7/7 bombings took place the day after the success of the London bid was announced. So there's the ever-present knowledge that the huge gathering of members of the public in one place at a time, is something to be reckoned with. Certainly I know that the Ministry of Defence are putting another 13,500 personnel at the disposal of the police and the Olympic authorities. So, there's a huge amount of very worthwhile planning going on there, but equally it's something to think about. Maybe there's also a way in which we're even going to see a certain amount of disengagement because the Olympics will loom so large, and I must say apologies if we're contributing to that, but this is one of our most heavily subscribed HR and diversity webinars to date, so there's clearly a sense that we need to get our heads around it. But it's a celebration. Surely hosting the 30th Olympiad, having been running since 1894, is a very exciting prospect. The British Olympic Association worked on the bid from 1997, and it's had a real spin-off, even though it's a sort of involuntary change program that we're being pulled through as a nation and as a city in London. It is one which, to quote the Commission for a Sustainable London 2012, which is there to ensure that we have the most sustainable games ever. It's the largest single infrastructure, sporting and legacy event in the world, so it's certainly something which will have a lasting positive impact. It's the first time that an Olympic park has been built on time, on budget, and to an extremely high spec, with a real eye on sustainability. So there is plenty that we can think about celebrating as well. But just to think about what the practicalities are, what are we actually talking about, I'd like to turn to Rick Cudworth from Deloitte to just talk us through a little bit of what's coming in terms of the practicalities of the Games. So Rick, would you like to talk us through the dates?
Yeah, thanks Jennifer, I will do. And I just, you highlighted my background there, and just to say, it's proved a real insight having the opportunity to work with the likes of LOCOG and GLA on their preparations for the Games. But in doing so, you also get a real sense of the scale of the Games from the inside. It has been a massive planning operation to date, and both those organisations at the moment are now full scale into turning from planning into sort of operational readiness. Just in terms of the dates here that you've got, I think, as you said from the BT expression of the number of snow days, in reality we've got the Olympic torch which arrived in the UK on May the 18th. Now that's going to flow right across the country, creating, I guess, short waves of disruption. But for all organisations, I think it's important just to understand where that torch relay is passing through, and whether it's going to impact on your organisation, and also whether it provides an opportunity for your people to see the torch event as it travels through the country. The main Olympic Games commence on the 27th of July and run through to the 12th of August. But again, just one thing to flag around that is the things like the Olympic route network start up about 2 days before the opening of the Games. That's the plan currently. So there will be some increases in disruption in the days prior to the 27th of July. There is quite a significant bump up and a significant set of arrivals coming in prior to the Games. We're talking about nearly 30,000 media arriving, and they will certainly be arriving a few days before the Games, as well as the Olympic route network. We have a transition period between the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. That transition period will hopefully be a little bit quieter. The Olympic route network, for example, is taken away at that point, so the roads are back and fully open. but do expect still some disruption. Just after the games, it'll be very busy as athletes and some officials depart, etc. So do expect some disruptions.
Absolutely. I think it's quite an insight to recognise that it does happen from mid-May. And those of you who are thinking, well, where can I find more information on this? We're going to make sure that at the end of this webinar there are a couple of slides that capture many of the online resources that will point you to these things. So you will actually have a record of that. And talking of which, moving on to the travel picture for London when the games are underway and during those surrounding periods. I know, Rick, having talked before with you about this, that there's a really very helpful resource, getaheadofthegames.com, which has been put on by Transport for London for the Olympic Delivery Authority, which is going to give us some really good modelling of the transport situation, isn't it? I wonder, have we lost Rick, or are you still with us, Rick? I'm just going to ask my colleague if we can see whether Rick's still on the line. At this point, Sam and Caroline, do you have any comments to make on the anticipation of travel disruptions while we're getting Rick back on the line?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I think, yeah, the points Rick made are very apt ones. I mean, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that, we've seen kind of from the inside that LOCOG have, for the past 7 years, had quite a large transport team planning how operationally all of this is going to work. So I think the kind of stories of, Armageddon on the transport network, while obviously they can't be discounted, we would hope that, things actually won't turn out quite as bad as maybe feared. But nonetheless, obviously, I think it's quite clear that there will be some disruption. And, how employers can deal with that is very much down to, how well they consider it in advance, and the levels of communication that they have with their employees. So we've seen a lot of clients who have been engaging with their employees very early and running through various measures and different procedures that they can put in place to deal with any disruption as and when it might occur. And I think as with most things that we will speak about from the legal perspective, the key thing to all of this is to think about it early and to communicate kind of clearly and well with your employees.
Thank you, Sam. So Sam Barnes of Freshfields there. Absolutely. So the key is to work out where will be affected in terms of obviously your corporate location, but also where your employees are coming in from. I know Transport for London at the moment say that 65% of tube stations should see no additional waiting times, but I know that many of those, of course, are the outlying ones. So it is definitely something that we need to tackle and be prepared for. And as I say, I would recommend that you go and look at the site that models the predicted disruptions, and that's getaheadofthegames.com. But again, we'll show you that resource at the end of the webinar and make sure that we send that to you. So we asked you about your challenges when you registered, and travel disruption was certainly among them, and we're going to unpick that a little bit more as we go on and talk about staff coming in at different times to work around that, for example. But the other areas, looking at this infographic here that captures the kind of prominence of those challenges, you were certainly looking at issues of productivity, and that's not only whether staff can get into work, but actually will they be focusing or will they be streaming events live to their workstation and so on. Obviously, increased holiday demand and unauthorized absence looming large there, and that ties in with a survey that Deloitte carried out as well in terms of the concerns that employers were reporting. Rick, have we got you back on the line to comment on that?
Yeah, sorry, yes, you have.
Thank you.
And just to, this is actually the third in a series of surveys we've been doing. The first one was just over a year ago, and then we did a second one about 6 months ago, and this most recent one was done in December, and the results were issued in January. So from this, 40% of organisations have said that staff availability is their key concern, and I think there are two dimensions to it. One is actually ensuring they have enough people for the work that, or the customers and clients that they intend to serve during the period of the games. And for some organisations, say for example in retail or hospitality, that may indeed be more people they need rather than less. But the other concern that they've got is, even if I have enough people can they actually get to work on time at the times I need them. So those are the two specifics around that. To address it, the survey suggests that an increasing number, 33% of companies now intend to review their flexible working policies, and that's up from 14% 6 months ago. 43% now intend to review their annual leave policies, and that's up from 33%. So you can see a trend here as organisations have started to look at the impact of the games. More and more are starting to actually think about their flexible working policies, look at their annual leave policies. Also, in terms of employee engagement, to try and avoid, I guess, the unintended absences which may happen, we're seeing more and more companies starting to look at how do we ensure our staff, our people can see the games during games time. So we have 55% of companies now saying they'll install screens on working floors or staff rooms, and that's up from 30% 6 months ago. 26% will have screens in staff canteens, again up from 12%. And now only 5% of companies are saying that they will not allow staff to watch the games. That was 6 months ago 16%, and a year ago that was nearly a third of companies saying they wouldn't let staff watch the games. So we're seeing a change of thinking as organisations are going through this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rick. There's a real sense of if you can't beat it, join it, isn't it? It's a kind of growing sense that we can't stop people wanting to be part of it. And as you say, in a sense, if we can see it as an employee engagement initiative, because the downside of that is if we don't, then employees will look at what other companies are doing through their other friends and contacts and compare and perhaps feel demoralized. And they're coming to the opportunities that you put in, those of you who've registered to join us. You were looking at staff engagement and morale as being one of the greatest opportunities here, as well as the opportunity to test remote and flexible working. And they're clearly things that are of importance to all of you present. I don't know, Caroline, Rick, or Sam, whether you have anything to say on the opportunities, which we'll unpick a little bit more later, but anything just right now.
This is Caroline speaking. I suppose one of the greatest opportunities with the Olympics is to align the culture and the spirit of your business, your company, with those of the Olympics. So values such as excellence and high performance and team spirit are all very evocative on the sports field, but also in the workplace. Yeah. So I think that businesses have a very significant opportunity to take some of the values of the Olympics and to promote those within their office environment.
Yes, that's clearly a really positive way of viewing the games. Many thanks, Caroline. Caroline Stroud there from Freshfields.
I think as well, Jennifer, just to add, again, we're seeing some companies, and an interesting article in the FT today, and I think it was in the Evening Standard last week, around some of what government are doing, but to use the games as a way of enhancing flexible working arrangements for the long term, and for building in resilience of their organisations in the long term. So they're not just looking at it as just a games time planning initiative and engagement with their employees, but actually improving people's working experience long term.
Yeah, absolutely, Rick. I know that as we speak, thousands of Whitehall civil servants are undergoing a trial, part of Operation Step Change. It's being called from the 6th to the 9th of February, being asked to teleconference from home and check that remote networks will operate. And I think many organisations will be doing that kind of test and seeing it, as you say, not just a contingency to get through the summer, but something that we really could rely on increasingly in the future to keep step with the way that 21st century work works.
Exactly, yeah.
Great. Well, what I'd like to do now is to launch the first of the polls that we're planning to run, and to ask you that we've got lots of people online who will be looking at preparations right now. And I'd invite you to pop into this poll. It's a multiple choice in the sense that you can tick more than one box where you are currently. And apologies for the slightly jokey and sort of slightly downhearted, just me and a colleague or two really. But I'd be very interested if anybody feels they're in that situation, because I can imagine there are organisations in which some people have really got a sense of what's coming, both in terms of the risks and in terms of the opportunities, but not managed to really push it up the business agenda yet. So it'd be very interesting to see if that is your experience, or indeed whether you have leadership buy-in and a cross-functional team looking at the opportunities as well as the challenges. So the voting is coming in, and if we had any observations from our panelists, feel free to speak up while the voting continues.
Just one comment from me, Jennifer. I think in the way organisations are starting to think about their staff planning here, there are two themes. Some are going for a very centrally driven approach, and almost sort of, are going to tell their people the revised scheduled times for them to travel and get to work, etc. Others are going for a far more devolved approach, which is to provide their people with information in as easy a form possible and provide them with appropriate guidance, but leave it to their people to make the decisions as to how they come into work and when. Obviously, it will depend to an extent on the type of organisation, and if it needs people in place at a certain time, then a centrally driven approach is probably more appropriate. But we are seeing those two different styles. So you need to decide early on which way do you want to go in terms of your approach.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, that's another kind of cultural opportunity in a way, isn't it, to take that stance. So I've closed the poll because we had about 90% of people voted, and I'm just putting the results there on the screen. So that's interesting. A quarter of the people, and we've got nearly 100 people online, and a quarter of you have fessed up to it being just yourselves and a colleague. So well done on your pioneering bravery there, taking this issue forward, and hopefully having this conversation today will help you get it onto the agenda a little bit more widely. So any comments from our guests on what we see there with the results? There are quite a few organisations with some cross-functional work on risks, fewer with a look at the positive opportunities as well.
Yeah,
Sorry.
It's interesting to see the fewer on the cross-functional work on positive opportunities. Again, in the survey we've done we're seeing a far more rosy picture around confidence in the economic benefits coming from businesses. And I think we've got a sense from the survey we've done that as businesses have started to think about the games more and more, they've not only seen the risks and issues, but they've seen increasingly opportunities they can take. And retailers, not surprisingly, perhaps towards the front of that queue. 84% in our survey expect an increase in demand, for example. But it's been quite surprising, the companies I talk to and deal with, who are coming up with quite innovative ideas about how to engage their customers or their clients around Olympic-based themes. There are issues, and I'm sure my colleagues from Freshfields will talk about some of those around the sort of ambush marketing type things you need to avoid. But there are real opportunities, and certainly one client I've got runs their 2012 program effectively like a P&L account. So they're looking just as much at how much can they generate in opportunities, as well as potentially the costs of revised working arrangements.
And again, that's quite a nice way to present it within the business, isn't it? It's not just something we need to clamp down on, but it could be a real profit-related opportunity. Caroline, I think you had a comment there.
I was actually going to make a similar comment that I think the companies need to focus more on the positive side of the Olympics, given that only 20% are looking at cross-functional work on positive opportunities. So I think that's probably the area where companies are missing out.
Great, many thanks. So we'll go on with what I must apologise for now in light of talking about the positive side. This is the scary side. This is basically saying, well, if we don't prepare, we can expect these kind of challenges. Of course, absenteeism, as we've discussed, erratic working hours, disruptions in supplies. There's a whole body of advice out there to say, if you have perishable goods that you rely on, can you get them stockpiled in advance? So there are different ways of thinking beyond the people issues. But certainly we could expect an impact on morale if we don't join in, especially as we're hearing live today that there's so much going on in certain organisations to engage positively. If we don't engage positively in our own companies, then we may be seen to be falling short. So having said that, let's have a look at what is both a kind of contingency, a risk, and a positive opportunity, the flexibility point. So how do we get started? Obviously, it's about, to some extent, surveying, auditing the impact on the business, looking at who's critical to be there and at what time, to look for solutions, whether they involve remote working, whether they involve the possibility of staggered hours, to put together perhaps a survey and find out who's planning to do what and who can do what, testing out whether remote IT will have a sufficient bandwidth. I know that in The Guardian last weekend there was an even wider threat that the whole internet itself may not cope, but at least we can sort out what bandwidth, what ISP people are using and what's available through remote working, and also have a look at what we want to measure in terms of success during the games that we can then carry forward and use as business information for flexibility in the future. Rick, are these the kind of areas that you're finding organisations are getting to grips with?
Yeah, they are very much. I think staff availability is the big one, and that's one we've spoken on most. But the second biggest one tends to be around supplies and suppliers, and there's an awful lot of work going on, and many organisations are increasingly looking at these sort of non-perishable items. Can they and should they stockpile some of that ahead of the games to avoid unnecessary deliveries, particularly into the centre of London during that period? Others are having to look very closely at, it will depend on where you're located, but potential road closures or impacts on delivery times for things that do need to come into the organisation. Many of the people who do deliveries and also waste disposal as well are having to work pretty hard at rescheduling their time. So you may find, even if you don't feel you're affected, that your suppliers in these areas will come to you and say, actually, we will be delivering to you now instead of normal time during the day, but it could be 2 in the morning. There are trials going on at the moment in and around London around allowing deliveries through the early hours of the morning to keep the heavy vehicles off the road network.
Absolutely.
So suppliers is a big area.
Yes, absolutely. So it's about thinking about all the kind of groups of people that we depend on, both those that we employ and those that we rely on for supplies and those that we serve as clients. What will their planning involve? Can we join with them potentially in planning and plan together in a way that works around the Olympics? Possibly remote meetings are an obvious option for the way that we serve clients through that period, and I think a lot of organisations are looking in that direction. For ourselves at My Family Care, we're really aware about the way that flexibility and family needs are often very closely combined in organisations, but here it's a very different emphasis on flexibility. That said, there are particular needs that those with caring responsibilities will have, and perhaps some ways in which we need to think further around that, because I know some organisations that will be screening events might be doing so at 5 o'clock, which is a fantastic help to someone who isn't going home to a caring responsibility in order to avoid the tube disruption. But if you have to go home and relieve the nanny or do a nursery pickup or pick up your mum from a hospital appointment, then that's not going to work. And equally, those who rely on carers may find that normal arrangement is disrupted. Certainly many of our clients who rely on My Family Care for backup care arrangements are looking in detail about the arrangements that can be put in place for that. And particularly the Paralympics Games, of course, cross over with the return to school, so there may be an increase in traffic there that we need to accommodate in terms of those who are involved in school runs. So I don't know if any of you have any further comments, our guests, on that.
You touched on the earlier slide, Jennifer, there, with one of those on testing, and many organisations from our survey have not really thought through around how they may test significant changes to their operations that they're planning for games time. And we think it's absolutely crucial that organisations do try and find opportunities to test, just like we've highlighted the many government employees are doing at the moment. And if you can't physically test some of these changes, then you should test them at least in a simulated way through desktops or exercises, just to make sure that everybody in your organisation is on the same page and understand what's going to happen, change, and how it's going to work, and make sure the planning effectively is rigorous and robust behind it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rick. So turning to Caroline and Sam at Freshfields, you're doing some particular work within the firm itself on managing travel delays and business disruption. Would you like to talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. We thought it would be just quite helpful to kind of talk through what Freshfields has done itself in terms of preparing for these potential travel delays. And for those of you who aren't aware, we are based in central London in Fleet Street, so we're kind of bang in the middle of quite a lot of the Olympic venues. And we are around 2,000 employees as well in our London base, about half of whom are lawyers and half of whom are support staff. And very much our plan is that it's going to be business as usual during the games. Most of our lawyers, in fact all of our lawyers currently, are quite used to remote working and working outside of the office. So when they go abroad or to client meetings, etc., all of them have BlackBerries, and we also all are able to log on to our desktops from home and work there. So we're very much intending that those kind of facilities that are already in place will really come into play during the Olympics in the event that someone does have difficulty in getting into the office. As to the approach that we're adopting as a firm, it's currently going to be a team-by-team basis. So while there'll be kind of overriding guidelines that will apply firm-wide, we're very much looking to individual team heads to work out what works best for their particular team and how best they can deal with any potential issues they have. We have set up within the HR department, we've got a small team which is specifically working on getting us prepared for the Olympics. And they are identifying priority teams within Freshfields whose presence on site is absolutely essential. So the obvious ones such as reception and security, who we really can't do without. So in those particular teams, we are looking at putting in place particular measures to ensure that there's no shortfall at all in those teams at the time. And in terms of general contingency planning, obviously as a business we have business recovery planning procedures in place of a normal course. So for example, if there is some kind of security threat in and around the office, then we do have other offices which are kind of ready to go on the outskirts of London, obviously a lot smaller than here, but we are also kind of linking into those so that in the absolute worst case scenario, then actually this could prove an opportunity to test those and potentially put them to use.
I know that some banks have reserved trading floors in quite remote sites, and are thinking about this again, as you say, Sam, as an opportunity to potentially bring those into use. Absolutely,
yeah, that's absolutely right. And I guess when you're looking at the teams that you absolutely can't move, say the receptions and securities, then there are various things you can do in terms of staggering start times, and if someone's got an early shift and it's just not going to be possible for them to get in, then looking at hotel accommodation, things like that. And also, I mean, one particular thing we're doing in relation with our billing team, there's quite a critical billing period for us that crosses during the games, and we're looking at temporarily sending members of the billing team to our European offices to go and sit with them for a few days or for a week. And obviously that has the benefit of ensuring that they won't be hit by any travel disruption, but also it's a really good opportunity for them to go and meet their colleagues abroad, to network within Freshfields and to meet their other colleagues. So that's kind of a best of both worlds situation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam. And I guess if you're looking, coming back to the point about overnight accommodation, if any people dialing in now are planning similar things, I guess we're all going to need to book that pretty soon, because I know that the accommodation is going to be, excuse me, in very high demand. And we might otherwise be looking at camp beds in the office as an alternative, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess that comes back to, looking at this early will enable you to identify whether you do in fact need any hotel rooms, and then obviously the sooner you do, the easier it's going to be to book them, because I imagine last minute could be very tricky.
Yeah. And also, Sam, I was struck by how what you said joined up with what Rick had said earlier about the scope there is to delegate responsibility for organising needs to departments or groups or team leaders. So I liked the fact that that very much chimed in terms of Freshfields taking that opportunity to empower different groups to act differently according to needs. And I know the other thing
absolutely. I think that, you know, with any large organisation, it's quite difficult to have a one-size-fits-all policy. So, you know, keeping things flexible is often the best way to go.
Absolutely. I know that you're also doing quite a bit around raising awareness of transport. So we'll perhaps skip through this slide fairly quickly, but that you've got plans to make transport information available to employees, which seems like a very smart move.
Yeah, that's right. You know, as you say, as the slide says, we've had Transport for London come in to give talks, and we're going to have pop-up stations and various posters around the office to make sure that people are, you know, aware of the options available to them.
Great, thank you. Now, coming to the advice that you're giving to client organisations, I mean, this does come back to risk management. We're going to talk a little bit more about opportunities again in a while, but there are risks, and one of them is sickies, as you say, in this slide that's in front of us now. Can you talk us through what we can do to at least be aware of that and try to plan for it?
Yes, I think the main thing here is to anticipate what policies or processes you need to have in place in good time before the games occur. And secondly, that you communicate transparently to employees what the expectations are, and particularly if they're going to be slightly different to the normal expectations that you've had in place for a while. So obviously there's a risk that people might use or abuse sick leave in order to take a day off to attend a special event if they have a ticket. And I think the most important thing there is to ensure that people understand how that would be addressed at the time. So putting in place a requirement in advance that's communicated well, that employees who are sick during the Olympic Games will need to provide medical evidence, will act as a deterrent to people taking unauthorised absence. And secondly, making it clear what the consequences of doing so are if, for example, the medical evidence is not provided, you know, what will happen to that employee and what the process would be. Both of those don't have to be a negative step if they're communicated and positioned properly so that people understand exactly what will happen and what the consequences are, and perhaps what the alternatives are, such as using some of their holiday or flexible working in a way which accommodates their wish for flexibility, but also means that the employer has predictability as to when people want. Because I think predictability is one of the key things that will ensure that businesses can continue as usual.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you for that, Caroline. I think, you know, that clarity up ahead of time is really important. Actually, we've had a few questions in, and a couple of them I know we're going to deal with in a little while, but there's one specifically on the legal side, coming back to the point that you were both making about the temporary shift working that we might put in place. And the questioner is asking, if we change to temporary shift patterns, is that effectively a change of terms and conditions of employment?
It would depend on the status of the shift patterns in place. So if those are contractual, in other words, they're set out in a contract at present, then it is advisable for the employer and the employee to agree the new and or temporary shift pattern. In other words, the employer will not be able to impose a new shift pattern. If they're flexible shift patterns which are set, you know, I don't know, a month in advance, or a week in advance, then obviously there's more flexibility to impose. But from an employee relations perspective, the best approach would be to have transparency of intention from the employer in respect of continuity of business, so that the cooperation of the employees is ensured and that there's a far higher likelihood of agreement. But yes, it would be difficult to impose new shift patterns where they're contractually fixed.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Caroline. Coming on to increased holiday requests, I mean, we may wish to allow these, we may wish to use them instead of people taking unauthorized absence. But a point here, I'm going to go quite quickly through these slides because there's a lot to cover. But, you know, we again, it's about clarity up front, isn't it, in terms of managing holiday demand. I know a lot of organizations have opened their holiday calendars early in order to gauge the demand. And when I was talking with Rick the other day about this, he was saying and a lot of them, or some of them, are closing it early too because it's getting to capacity. But it's about communicating what's reasonable, I guess, isn't it?
Absolutely, and having a fair method of apportioning that holiday amongst the employees. So one might argue that, you know, first come, first served isn't necessarily always going to be the fairest way in which you can allow people to have holiday, and it might be that you need to take a more equal approach across the board, such as, you know, allowing all employees to have 2 days when they can choose the date and 2 days when they're fixed, for example. It is possible to say no to a holiday request, but it has to be on reasonable grounds, driven by business reasons, and in good faith. So at the end of the day, the employer does have the right to refuse, but the more transparency and communication there is, the more likelihood that there will be an agreement as to, you know, a fair distribution of holiday during the critical period.
Thank you, Caroline. And as we see on the slide in front of us now, some of the people who need time out during the Olympics could be games makers, volunteers, equally people called up to the reserve forces, although I know that the plan is that there'll be a long lead-in on communication there. We did have a question as to whether it's in fact legal to request a GP sick note for absence. I don't know if you had any brief comments on that.
Well, only if you're sick.
Yes, I mean, just for the employer to request it is reasonable.
Oh, sorry. Yes, yes, it is legal for the employer to request.
Yes, none of us should be out there requiring our GPs. If we're not, that would be Olympic meltdown. I'm going to launch a poll just in a moment to ask whether those of you online have a sense of what your employees are doing, and I'm going to launch that just now. So there was another question, Rick, just while people are voting on employees' plans. Somebody asked us a little while ago, are mail deliveries and collections going to change, do we know, in central London? That relates to what you were saying about supplies and suppliers and so on. Do you have any knowledge on that, Rick?
A little bit, yeah. Actually, in our I've talked about our survey, but we've just literally published yesterday the booklet that outlines the results of the survey. But in there is a case study from Royal Mail Group, and if you read through that, basically it's saying they are doing extremely detailed planning of their deliveries just so they can maintain service levels, but that it will mean revised delivery times for some mail and revised collection times. So they are working through that, and they will be, I believe, communicating much of that very, very shortly.
Great. Many thanks, Rick. Somebody had also asked a question, has anybody allowed extra holiday for the Games, or indeed allowed people to save up holiday? And that very much relates to the poll that we're currently running. So anybody of our guests have any experience of that?
Well, certainly at Freshfields we are matching holiday with respect to volunteering. So for 1 day volunteering, we're matching that with a day holiday.
And that's similar here in Deloitte as well. We're doing that. I have heard of 1 or 2 of my clients actually encouraging their employees to take holidays during the period. But again, that actually does, again, come down to what you need for your business and what you believe demand will be during the period of the Games.
Absolutely, thank you. And here we can see some sense of the demand. Nobody's aware of being at capacity in terms of summer holiday requests currently. Quite a few organisations not yet sure, which is understandable. We often wouldn't be at this time of year. But does that prompt any comments from any of our panellists?
I think I'm fairly surprised at the low 16% number. I guess maybe that correlates to the, those businesses who anticipate that they are potentially going to be quite highly affected, and therefore those are the ones who have identified. But certainly there's nothing preventing employers right now, or as soon as they feel able, from going out and canvassing their employees and finding out what their plans are. Because for example, if one team member has bought 10 tickets to a particular event and wants to take all of his colleagues with him, then you could be facing 10 holiday requests on a particular day within a particular team. And that's the kind of thing that it'd be really good to find out early, so that if it simply wasn't possible to accept that request, then you could enter into discussions with those employees and work out a way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that 16%, just in case anybody's listening but can't see the slides, that's 16% only 16% who've identified employees involved. Relating to that, somebody's asked a question to say, is Freshfields prepared to share your Olympics policy on volunteering? And I know there's a document that we've listed in the resources, isn't there, Sam and Caroline, on managing Olympic volunteers. So I guess that is something that people can get online. We've got a link for that on one of the late slides in the webinar that will come through.
I think we just have to check with our HR team centrally.
Yeah, certainly. And we have also produced a publication which is a guide for employers in relation to games makers. So that there might also be some useful guidance in that as well.
Great. Thank you. So we'll send through what we're able to participants afterwards. I'm going to keep going quite briskly here. Somebody's just asking another question. Can you request that employees take leave over the Olympics? So, by contrast, could we require people, as we sometimes do between Christmas and New Year? Any brief thoughts on that? Can we make people have a holiday then?
I think we can request, certainly, people to take holiday during that time. I think it may be difficult to insist that somebody takes, 2 weeks of their holiday over that time out of the whole year, where their contractual right is to, 4 or 5 weeks over the whole calendar year. Great.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. So intellectual property risks are another risk that we might inadvertently have an Olympic option in our menu in the canteen as a healthy eating option and put the logo on, and we're not supposed to do that, so we need to think about some of those surrounding risks. As you've also outlined, and people will see these slides as follow-up, we need to be a little bit aware about potential harassment and discrimination issues, sort of rampant nationalism and comments being made that might offend people. But on the other hand, I mean, it really strikes me that the Paralympics in particular provide the ideal backdrop for certain diversity and inclusion initiatives and a celebration of difference. So I guess that there are two sides always to these coins. So it's time to refresh workplace policies, as we've been very much directed by Sam and Caroline there. It's time to think about what some of the implications might be. Gambling there, I notice you've highlighted. Did you have particular experience of clients worrying about that, by the way?
I think that was more our concern, that some people within the workplace might, take out informal bets, and our concern was really just on the impact on productivity, that people might be spending a lot of time concentrating on other things than their work.
Yes, yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you. So, there are definite implications and impact and risks to be managed, and I think we've had some real helpful clarity from yourselves, Caroline and Sam at Freshfields, on how we stand in relation to what's possible as an employer. As we said earlier, it's also an opportunity to really tie ourselves to those Olympic values and make the most of it. Screening the action, as Rick was saying, a huge increase in employers who are now realizing that that's something that they really need to do. There are also opportunities to make something of walking and cycling to work. I know GSK, for example, have a cycle buddy action where they've got people who currently cycle to work being a kind of mentor to those who want to step up to that. So there are opportunities to ramp up some of the sort of health and well-being initiatives. And equally, as I just mentioned, diversity and inclusion awareness around the Paralympics. perhaps tying with Caroline's theme about tying our organisational values to the Olympic values. You know, if you have an award scheme, is it your own Olympiad medalists and so on? So in terms of employee engagement, is there a risk that people will say, well, you know, it's only for those who like sports? I must say, as I got more and more interested in the whole games, in researching for this webinar, I actually went out and bought my family tickets to the Paralympics. I was very struck by the way that the opening ceremony of the Paralympics is being co-organised by Jenny Seeley, Artistic Director of Grey AI, which is an organisation working with deaf, disabled and non-disabled artists in performance, and co-organised by Bradley Hemmings, who is the Artistic Director of the Greenwich and Docklands International Festival. So, you know, there are huge cultural events. Of course, the Olympics opening ceremony, they're directed by Danny Boyle. So I guess one of the things we can do is look a little bit more beyond the sporting element of the Olympics. There's a musical element too, the BT River of Music, the 21st and 22nd of July, the Radio 1 Hackney weekend tied to the Olympics towards the end of June. So definitely opportunities to make the most of it in various ways. And I wonder what...
Also, I was going to say also, Jen, there's the GLA live sites at places like Hyde Park with huge entertainments. And, you know, I think all the evidence in past games is even if you're not a big sports fan, people can get caught up in the whole atmosphere. And I think, as we discussed before, it can be a bit like cricket. You know, not a huge number of people in the country may be great fans of cricket, but when England are winning and winning at home and against Australia, for example, then an awful lot more people get interested, and so it becomes all-consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that will happen, I guess, whether or not we bind our own organisational values to it, and there is an opportunity to do that. And as you said, the live sites will be taking place, screening the games around London, so there may be opportunities to kind of go out and have a picnic or something, you know, if that doesn't add hopelessly to the transport disruption, of course. So I'd like to invite you to let us know what you're all doing as participants in terms of your plans. It may be screening of events, it may be these health and well-being initiatives, something around celebrating difference, or other more kind of straightforward party events. If you have something that you're doing that's quite original, do let us know by typing into the questions field as well if there's something that we haven't really picked up on. I mean, are there any interesting stories that any of our guests have of people that are doing anything quite original around the Olympics?
I mean, at Freshfields, one thing we're doing is we do have a certain allocation of tickets because we're one of the sponsors. So we will be having groups of employees from across the business going together to particular events. So that would be quite a nice way of, you know, getting employees involved, and also kind of the social aspect of it with their work colleagues. A few clients we've spoken to have discussed taking people to see the free events. So, for example, the road cycling and the marathon, which you can effectively watch from anywhere on the route. So obviously that gives rise to the usual kind of employee away day issues. But that's certainly another way that people can get involved.
Absolutely, Sam. And you know, if you're taking people out to watch the road cyclists passing, that's very different from people sneakily slipping out, isn't it? So, you know, it's a good one to get hold of, isn't it? I'm just going to share the results of the poll there and have a look at how people voted. So of this self-selecting audience that has chosen to dial in on the topic of Olympic readiness, there's an overwhelming majority going to screen the event, 78%, comparing with the was it 54% in your earlier survey, Rick, that you highlighted?
Yeah, just trying to find that. Was it yeah, 55%, I think. Yeah.
So interesting. And various people have got a range of initiatives there. I don't know if there's something coming in on our question panel at the moment. I think we're busy voting rather than typing in. If you do have anything that you want to share that you're doing, that you'd like a bit of promo for online, do feel free to type that in. So thank you very much, and thank you so much for participating in the polls today, because that will be interesting information to go forward as well when we share the materials from the webinar. So just as we begin to draw to a close on this session, thinking more long term, I've been really very impressed by the way that the Olympic Delivery Authority has captured the learning legacy of the Games. Certainly there are 10 learning legacy themes, everything from archaeology to project management, that have been drawn out of the Games, and there are going to be ongoing events to share that knowledge. So the learning legacy has been treated very seriously by those authorities involved in delivering the Games. In terms of our own point of view as people who live and work and run businesses in London, the impact is there for London in terms of visibility, new venues, award-winning venues such as the Velodrome, improved infrastructure, things like the Javelin train, Westfield shopping centre, the Olympic Village, which will have ongoing use, the personal and skill development of those who are involved, both in ramping up flexibility within our organisations, and we talked about devolving responsibility for that where we can, and of course of those who are volunteers and games makers. I was chatting recently with somebody called Steve Tams of Peak Performance, who happened to be training 9,000 volunteer drivers for the Games. And he was saying perhaps, in terms of legacy, that has an impact in terms of a bit better driving skill around London. So there's a real sense in which there's something going forward, not least of which could be that cultural shift towards increased flexibility within our organisations. So Rick and Caroline and Sam, do you have anything to round off in terms of a must do or kind of takeaway points?
One point from me, Jennifer, and it's just around the people side, and one we didn't touch on particularly in this so far, but it's just to make sure that we did sort of talk about security. There could be security incidents, so absolutely make sure that your crisis incident response mechanisms are fit for purpose, that your messaging systems to employees are tried and tested, so that you can take care of your people if you need to. Yes,
that's a very good point. Thank you, Rick. And just to let you know, all of you, that we will be following up with a survey, and we're going to put into that some of the questions where people are saying what people have been saying, what are others doing. So we're going to survey you as an interested group that's getting hold of this topic. So as I've mentioned, the list of resources will be there for you in the materials that we're sending around. So do look out for that. And as I say, there are events going on through the year. ACAS is running training on managing the impact of the Games. And there are all those learning legacy events being hosted by the professional bodies involved in the different areas. And the arts and culture events, of course, not to be forgotten. For ourselves, we can certainly support and advise on flexible working, and indeed support you with backup care, backup childcare and elder care solutions. So please do ask if you'd like our support in that area. So it just remains for me to say a really warm thank you to Rick Cudworth, partner at Deloitte, Caroline Stroud, partner at Freshfields, and Sam Barnes, associate at Freshfields, for all your very helpful advice this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, and thank you all for attending. Many thanks.
Bye-bye.